You were probably around Benoit many times.
Around Benoit, I traveled with Chris.
Oh, okay. Well,
There were nights. I traveled far and wide with Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero in cars together.
I mean,
We ate together. We traveled together. Not all the time, but I spent a lot of time with Chris. Chris was one of my buddies.
yeah. I mean, I'm sorry for for your losses there, man. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you read about it online. Nancy Benoit's sister recently did an interview. She's 6 years removed from the tragedy. Obviously, I believe the coroner or the guy that did the autopsy even told her that he probably would have been dead within 10 months if that tragedy didn't happen. I mean, being around him, did you ever feel like there was anything off about him, or did you always just kind of chalk that up as Chris being Chris and him being intense and caring about his craft?
Okay, when you answer questions like this, you have to be careful because it's the fair thing to do. The fair thing to do, as somebody who was close to Chris and near him for a long time, and up till 3 months before he unfortunately went home and killed himself and his family. So.
And by the way, I'm not asking you to predict, like to say,
no. You were very clear. I just want to, I would never give a frivolous answer here because this is where the stuff gets serious, and this is where this stuff, how kids say these days, it gets real. This
Right.
is very close to a lot of people, including me, and you have to, there's a certain amount of responsibility. Okay. With that said, everybody knew there was something not quite right with Chris. Chris was very, very, very quiet. Chris was now. First of all, that's who Chris was. Chris was a quiet, unassuming guy, but he was very quiet at the end. Chris was extremely intense. He was always like that, but he was particularly intense at the end. Chris and Eddie, up until Eddie died, they were fighting all the time. Chris was a bit of a perfectionist. He wanted things to be perfect. He wanted Eddie, to be part of his workout regimen and his stuff. And, he'd break Eddie's balls and Eddie would break his balls. And then at the end, Chris was like surly all the time. And I mean, he was always a good guy, but Chris was not a guy you talk to. He was alone. He was off to the side. He was. I think if it was one of those things, let's put it this way: if it was one of those things where somebody came to you and they somehow said, Jimmy, give me 5 guys on the roster that you think could potentially something bad happen to or die in the next 10 years, who would they be? I think Chris would be on that list. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like Chris is like, the guys who had a history and everybody knew of or the name showed up on a list of steroid use, and they like their alcohol and they like to drink and maybe they used other things, and they were taking a few painkillers, and they were overdoing it with the Vicodin or whatever. And some of them were really out, like Kurt and Eddie were kind of out there about it. I mean, you knew something was not quite right. The other thing is, if you know anything about top athletes, a lot of people don't know, the top athletes frequently, because of the way they train, and I'm not talking about bodybuilders, I'm talking about athletes like LeBron James. I'm not saying LeBron James falls under this category, but a lot of them have enlarged hearts. It's just the way the heart manages the body. It's not necessarily healthy, but sometimes it's not necessarily that unhealthy. A lot of them, because of the strain they put on their bodies, have enlarged hearts. Okay, so then you take anabolic steroids, and that only enlarges your heart further. And then you take all the drugs that, some people take in their respective businesses, and that only makes the heart larger and larger and larger. So, that's what happened to Eddie, and that's probably, if she's correct, that sounds like, what happened with Chris. The thing about one of the things that she said I wrote was that she said she thought she disagreed with the concussion theory Am I correct? Isn't that what she said?
Yes, I believe she. Yeah, I believe she did say she disagreed with that and thought it was, due to steroid.
Roid rage, yeah. And I 100%, even though I have no idea, I 100% disagree with her. If you saw him, if you saw the bumps this guy took, and know a little about athletes and know a little about bodies and know a little about head trauma, you can figure out that this guy, everything combined, but a lot of head trauma. I would say she's 100% wrong.
I think that wrestling should have an off season, or at the very least, maybe have more breaks for the boys.
Never. It's too big. It's gotten so big.